This is Let's Get Growing with horticulturalist Nathan Wilson at Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Flowery Branch. Get information you need for gardening, landscaping, and home plant care. We're taking your calls right now at 706-865-3181 or email info@WRWH.com. Now, here's Nathan.
Good morning, gang. Welcome to the program. It's great to be with you again. Of course, we bring you wonderful gardening tips, ideas, inspirations week after week here on Let's Get Growing, brought to you by WRWH in Cleveland, Georgia. And we're glad that we are getting closer and closer to Christmas. Closer and closer to Christmas. Today's the 15th of December, which means we're just 10 days away. Just 10 days away to the big 25th of this month. And what I was thinking about talking about today would be, what can you do, what can you get as far as gifts go for a gardener? Let's talk a little bit about the gardener's gift bag. If you have a buddy or a friend or a family member, maybe an aunt, maybe an uncle, maybe a cousin, whoever, they need something for the garden. They need something special and unique. And later in the program, we're going to talk about the gardener's gift bag for sure. What can you get your friend or neighbor for Christmas during the next half of the show? But I definitely want to bring some tips and some things that we should be doing in the garden this time of year, this time of December. Of course, as far as gifts go, we will talk about books and tools, apparel, and, of course, plants. Plants, of course, make wonderful gifts. And that's what I want to talk about. Before we left the program last week, I was discussing that giving a plant, a tree or a shrub, is a great idea for a gift for Christmas, for sure. And so, to begin with, I would say, what are you going to give? What are you going to give that family member? You could give them the gift of life. Last week, I gave you 4 reasons why you should gift a tree or shrub this year. Number 1, remember that December is the best time to plant. Now, the best time to plant is now, for sure. And the closer we get to spring, we're losing that window. Remember, folks, that we want to plant when the plant doesn't require as much water. Now, if you plant a containerized tree or shrub, you can plant it any time of the year as long as the ground is not frozen. However, in the summertime, it's not the best time to plant because the plant is needing so much water. And if we go through droughts, period of no rain, and then we don't supplement with irrigation or water, that plant will suffer and it will slowly grow, or perhaps it may even pass on into that great garden in the sky. So we don't want to do that. We want to be successful. And that's what Let's Get Growing is all about. It's about trying to be successful, trying to do as much as we can to make sure that we're not losing plants, that there's no diseases, etc. in the landscape. And if you plant now, you will be doing so much better. So, of course, I, as you know, am the manager at Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Flowery Branch. And we have people come out in this cold weather and they say, oh, we're just looking around. We're going to come back in the spring and plant. And, after the cold is gone, I said, no. You need to be planting now. You need to be planting now. You see, the ground is warm enough that once the plant is installed below the surface, the roots will continue to grow. The soil temperature is somewhere around 45 degrees right now. Plants can continue to grow slowly, but they'll continue to grow like that. They're not going to grow above ground, which is not a problem because that's what you want. You want them to not be growing above ground, so they'll put all their effort and energy below ground and won't require as much water. So, the number 1 reason to gift a tree or shrub this year is because it's a great time to plant. I cannot stress that enough. But number 2, the second reason why you should gift a tree or shrub this year is because technology and electronics, which many folks will probably be gifting, well, they will become obsolete, they will become outdated very quickly, and they will be replaced very soon. Some of those electronics will wind up at your local Goodwill. But trees and shrubs, they will not need to be replaced for a lifetime. They will not be replaced for a lifetime, and in most cases, they are going to outlive both you and I. A good tree that's planted now should outlive both of us, for sure. And, when we're planting trees, we have to think about that. We have to remember that we're planting for the future. Someone says that, cultivation is completely understood, or you understand the meaning of gardening, when you realize that you're going to plant a tree that you will never sit underneath. So that's what we're doing. They're going to be young trees. They're going to be small, but they're going to live a long time. Electronics and today's technology won't last that long. So the third reason why you need to gift a tree or shrub this year is because things like clothing and handbag and accessories, they will go out of style. But trees, on the other hand, shrubs, on the other hand, will never go out of style, and they will provide both intrigue and they're going to provide inspiration for decades at least. Like I said, they're going to last a long time. So style, clothing, handbags, all of those kinds of things, that's not going to last, but trees and shrubs will. The last reason, the fourth reason why you should gift a tree or shrub this year is because cookies and candies, even though they're sweet, they soon will be forgotten after they're eaten. But remember, trees and shrubs will always be in the landscape to remind you of the loved ones who gifted them to you in Christmas 2018. So, if you want to give candies and little nice confectionery treats, that's wonderful. But remember, they'll only be enjoyed for a few moments until they're consumed, and trees, on the other hand, can always be looked at year after year, season after season, month after month, day after day. When we think about plants, we think about the way plants look throughout the year. You're giving a gift now. Maybe there's no leaves on the trees. Maybe there's no flowers on the shrub, but there will be. There will be. Say, camellias look great right now. They would make a wonderful plant. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the plant section. But, some things like dogwoods, they would make a great gift this time of year, or redbuds, but there's not a leaf on them. But, in the springtime, there will be flowers. There will be leaves. And it's a gift that's always changing, a gift that's always new. Fall color comes around. Fall color makes things look great in another time of season. So, if you are good with this, if you're good with gifting a tree or shrub, and you want to share a Christmas gift that would be perfect for the gardener, I'll tell you what, if you know of something that would be great for a gardener, how about you send us a message to info@WRWH.com, and we'll talk about the gift you're going to give your gardener this year. We'll talk about it on next week's program. So again, if you'd like to share a Christmas gift that would be perfect for a gardener, how about you send us a message at info@WRWH.com, and we'll talk about it next week on the program. Moving on, we want to talk a little bit about a perfect house plant that you already probably are very familiar with. I don't know of a soul who doesn't know of this particular plant. But of course, house plants make perfect gifts as well, not just trees or shrubs. And poinsettias are classic this time of year. Poinsettias are a wonderful gift. And of course, like I said, they're classic. They've been around a long time. They have these large, colorful flower petals, which aren't actually flower petals at all. They're called bracts, B-R-A-C-T-S. They're called bracts, or basically a modified leaf. That's why they're not a petal, because they are a modified leaf. And even though they change color much like a petal might, they're botanically not a petal at all. So keep that in mind. Now, regardless of bract or leaf or petal, they're beautiful, and they are perfect for gift giving. They are perfect for gift giving. So be sure that if you give a poinsettia this year, that you tell your loved ones to keep this house plant in the coolest indoor room possible. They must be indoor. They cannot be outdoors, because it will become very cold. And of course, you cannot have any freezing for house plants and tropical plants, which poinsettias are in that group. So again, houseplants make a wonderful option, poinsettias in particular. Now, if you put them in a room that is too high of a temperature, if it's too warm, that might encourage the plant, the flowers at least, and the leaves to fall prematurely. And I know you've probably seen that happen. makes the plant look pretty sad, really sad. But it's okay. You just want to place it in an area where there's, of course, no freezing, but a cooler part of the room. You don't want it in your 80 or 90 degree room where you like to snuggle up with your loved one or eat a cup of soup by the fireplace. You'd want it in a room that's a little off to the side, a little less warm. So, talking about poinsettias, if you are looking for poinsettias, of course, Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Flowery Branch, Georgia, has just what you need. There are plenty of beautiful pink, white, and red ones. And folks, they are going fast. They are going fast. The great thing about the poinsettias here at Lanier Nursery and Gardens is that they are Georgia grown, and they are not shipped from some faraway place. No, they are grown locally, and so you can rest assured that the plants here at Lanier Nursery and Gardens are going to be coming from a farm family either up the street or down the road. And you can visit Lanier Nursery and Gardens online at laniernurserygardens.com. You can find directions to the location as well as contact information. If you'd like to send a message through the website, you can do that as well. But what a great time to buy a tree, a shrub, poinsettia, something living for your loved one to enjoy for years to come. Now that we've talked a little bit about houseplants, let's talk a little more about the landscape. This morning, you may be wondering what's going on with the weather. The weather is always up and down. Welcome to Georgia, right? It may be warm one day. It may be cold the next day. I guess at some point we will become more and more cold, but some days are nice and some are not, right? 70 one day, 30 the next. Temperatures are up and down. What that encourages in the landscape is that encourages something underground to happen and change. And I'm talking about your bulbs, your narcissus, which would be your jonquils or daffodils, tulips perhaps, crocus, any of these things. What can happen is these warm days can encourage bulbs to prematurely grow and expose their little green leaves above the ground. Now, they're not really going to be hurt. You're not going to have any kind of damage per se to the plant, but you can hide the green so that it doesn't look weedy. It doesn't look unkept, You're going to still want them to do their natural thing, let them do what they want to do. But if you were to sprinkle some pine straw on top, that can help to hide them, keep them looking fresh, and also it might give you the opportunity to give them a little bit of protection if we were to have some drastic cold. But otherwise, the bulb itself will be just fine, tucked away nice and warm underground under that blanket of mulch that you've already applied, because remember, mulch is very important. So let's talk a little bit about contrasting colors in the landscape. I've thought of some perennial plants that are wonderful when they're partnered together. They're wonderful when they're partnered together. I know we've talked about plant design, garden design a bit, and color, of course, is very important. But we're going to talk specifically about some plants that have some great contrasting color. Of course, to remind you, contrasting color are colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. They're opposite of each other on the color wheel, which would be something like green and red, or blue and orange, or, which we're going to talk about today, purple and yellow. Purple and yellow, one of my favorite combinations in the landscape. They can be very impactful, give you a nice, happy feeling, especially the yellow with that deep, rich purple behind it can look wonderful. So to start off, the first plant combo I want to talk about is Coreopsis and Homestead Verbena. If you're familiar with Coreopsis, it's also called tick seed. Wonderful name, right? Tick seed. But I guess it gets its name because the little seeds that are produced after the flowers come on are little kind of tick-shaped, nice and round black little seeds. But the Coreopsis itself has this beautiful yellow flower. Now, there's plenty of variations and cultivars. One is no better than the other. It's just whichever one you like and enjoy. Some can get quite tall, but some can stay really short as well. But if you backdrop that, or rather partner that, not necessarily backdrop, but if you partner that with verbena, particularly one called Homestead Verbena. Homestead Verbena is a Verbena canadensis, which means of Canada, which means it's from North America. And it is a great perennial verbena. Most verbenas are going to be tropical and used as annuals, but this Homestead Verbena is a great perennial that is going to be deep, rich purple, and it's going to look great with that yellow. So a wonderful combination of yellow and purple with the Coreopsis and the Homestead Verbena. Homestead Verbena, I should have mentioned, creeps and kind of crawls along the ground, does a great job for a ground cover, but the great thing is it does die back year after year, but it comes right from the root, right from the ground. Very easy to propagate, so you can pass them along to a friend, you can root them out, whatever you'd like to do. Okay, so we're talking about contrasting colors in the landscape, contrasting purple and yellow together. We're going to have to take a quick break, but when we come back, I've got a few more plants that you're just going to love, and you're going to want to add them to your landscape. So hang on tight. We'll be right back.
Live editions of Let's Get Growing can be heard Saturday mornings at 9 on AM 1350 and 93.9 FM WRWH.
Back to more Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
All right, so we've been talking about using contrasting colors in the landscape, in the garden. Contrast, of course, gives you the most impact possible. We can contrast a lot of things. You can contrast texture, you can contrast shape or form, but when it comes to color, that's the life of the garden. And so contrasting colors are going to give you that immediate curb appeal, impact from the street. Your neighbors are going to be envious. They're going to be envious. They're going to want exactly what you have. We were talking about purple and yellow. Purple and yellow are two of the easiest colors to find in the landscape, and you can bring them together and you can make this beautiful contrasting situation. Of course, we talked about Coreopsis and Homestead Verbena, but the next combo that I would recommend you to utilize would be our native purple mistflower and swamp sunflower. Now, swamp sunflower is going to be, it's a true sunflower, but it is perennial. It is helianthus, but it will come back year after year. You don't have to worry about replacing it like you do the sunflowers that you grow from seed, the mammoth or the was it Russian giant? I forget. But anyhow, those are annuals. This is a perennial. And swamp sunflower can handle wet soil. If you have it, doesn't necessarily need wet soil, but it would like it to be somewhat moist to average. And it's going to get pretty large. It's definitely going to get over the height of a person. It'll be taller than a person. So it will need to be on the back of your border, maybe the center of an island or somewhere. But the purple mistflower is going to be a bit shorter. And so you can place that in front of your sunflower. And that purple mistflower is actually related to, say, Joe Pyeweed. It's a eupatorium. It is related to Joe Pyeweed. So, of course, both of these are going to be great choices if you're looking to help nature out, to give a good source of nectar, but also host plants as well. And you can definitely use that purple mistflower right in front of the sunflower, because it's going to be, the purple mistflower maybe 3 to 4 foot or so. And so the sunflower will spire out above that for sure. Purple mistflower can also be called ageratum. If you're familiar with ageratum, definitely has this nice tight purple flower. Now the great thing about both of these is that they bloom. The sunflower starts pretty early in the summer, not early in the summer, but earlier than mistflower. But mistflower starts in the autumn. Starts in the autumn blooming, and when nothing else is blooming, you have the sunflower blooming late into the autumn, and also the mistflower, the purple mistflower blooming right in front of it. Can make a great combination, as well as the impression. If you're looking for impression in the landscape, you will definitely get that with those two plants. Continuing on with the purples and yellows as far as contrast goes, let's think a little bit about two of the classic plants. Maybe you already have them, but maybe you're not using them together. Black-eyed Susan and purple coneflower. Black-eyed Susan, of course, also called Rudbeckia, is a beautiful native plant, has yellow petals with a dark, deep black center. That's where it gets its name, Black-eyed Susan, like it's got one black eye looking right at you. But surrounding that black eye, of course, are these petals that are strap-like, and they're coming away from the center of the bud there. And purple coneflower has a similar form. The flower looks very similar. It has more of a kind of brown, sometimes green and gold in the center, whereas the petals that come away from the center of the flower are going to be purple. And, of course, there are hybrids that you can use that are not purple, but the basic, the species, rather, of the purple coneflower is going to be purple. So you've got purple and you got that bright gold color mixed together. Because they have the same flower shape, people may get confused and think they're both the same thing, but they're not. And because of that, you're still going to have a beautiful look to the plant, to your border or to your section where you're planting them, but at the same rate, you're going to have that contrast. So you're looking for that unity between the form, the flower type, and contrast with the color. So, again, we've talked about contrasting perennial plants. These are the combinations that are going to give you the purple and yellow combinations that are going to give you some of the greatest impact. Number 1 is Coreopsis and Homestead Verbena. Number 2 is purple mistflower and swamp sunflower. Number 3 is Black-Eyed Susan and purple coneflower. Now, of course, I've given you these in that kind of 3 combos there, but you can mix them together. You can divide them apart, combine them however you like. These are great plants with great flowers, and if you use them together, you're going to have beautiful impact and wonderful appeal. From far away, you'll be so impressed with the look you get. Okay, so moving away from using plants and talking about certain plants, let's talk about something we should be doing right now in the wintertime. One thing we should be doing is cleaning our pruning shears and other pruning tools. Of course, we should not be pruning this time of year. No way should we be out there chopping away at a plant and opening wounds that are not going to heal for the next few months. What we want to do, though, is to use the shears that we're going to, clean the shears that we're going to use in the spring. That's what we want to do right now. So if you have bypass pruning shears, if you have a pruning saw, if you have even some kind of knife that you may cut smaller things with, or maybe a pair of scissors. Scissors would be great for small plants with thin leaves, grasses, perhaps even daylilies and things like that. All of these things need to be kept up. They need to be in good shape and in working order and condition. And in order to do that, we want to make sure that they're very well cleaned and, of course, that they're sterile. Whenever we're cleaning pruning shears, we want to make sure that we're sterilizing them. There could be some latent disease or bacteria, fungus particles on the plant, on the shear itself, on the tool, the device itself. We want to make sure that we're cleaning them. There's 2 ways you can go about cleaning them. Number 1, you can dip them in rubbing alcohol. 70, 90%. I don't think that really matters too much. As long as you have a strong rubbing alcohol, you can apply that to the plant, to the shear. And of course, with rubbing alcohol, you don't have to worry about rusting. It will dry on contact. So begin to dry on contact. But number 2, you could also use a bleach solution mixed with water. If you take a 1 part bleach and 10 parts water and dilute it down to that ratio there, you will have a good solution that's not only going to help clean, but also is going to be sterile. It's going to it's going to make the blades sterile. Any bacteria that's hanging around will be killed. Any fungus that's hanging around will be killed. So again, you can use alcohol. You can also use a water bleach solution. 1 part water, 1 part bleach, 10 parts water. So you want to dilute that down. So one thing you can do in the landscape after you've cleaned your pruning shears, it's like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I know I said don't do any pruning and hacking and whacking back, but let's try to enjoy what's outdoors inside this holiday season. What I mean is, now is a good time to cut your holly, your juniper, your magnolia, your cedar branches. And I don't mean prune, really. I just mean trim. Just trim enough to bring inside. 1 little cut or 2 on a plant is not going to cause damage, but you don't want to do any major pruning, of course. But, of course, hollies have these beautiful berries that can be brought in, contrasted with the green foliage, as well as magnolia. If you're lucky enough to find a magnolia that's in seed right now, you have those bright red seeds in that seed pod, that strong center seed pod that's nice and brown, the dark green glossy leaves. Junipers, cedars, of course, can be a great way to fill in those broad leaves that the hollies and the magnolias bring about, the fine texture there. Don't forget about nandinas. Even though nandinas aren't the best plant, if you have nandinas out there, you may see that they have beautiful berries. And of course, their foliage is going to be gorgeous as well this time of year. Nice, brilliant red color, maybe even into purple hues. Don't forget about loropetalum and gold mop cypress, the yellow false cypresses. You can trim those back just a little bit, just the tips, just enough to make a beautiful display for this holiday season. My aunt, I'm going to give a tip from her. She showed me just the other day what she's done. She's taken holly and juniper and whatnot and placed them into a beautiful, it's an old-fashioned bread bowl that she has, a wooden bread bowl. Beautiful, makes a great centerpiece right there around her dining table. Again, I want to make sure that you realize that even though we shouldn't be doing hard pruning and major pruning, we can trim a little bit to bring these branches, these foliage, these berries, we can work to bring those into our house and really enjoy what's going on outside and get a little holiday festivities going on around the dinner table. Now, one other tip that comes from my aunt would be to take all of your trimmings, all your clippings, place them in the beautiful patterns or design that you're looking for, and go ahead and buy a little LED lights that are battery powered, so you can mix and mingle those with the foliage and get some really good impact. Of course, you could use candles and things like that, but what you're doing is you're creating this beautiful centerpiece, and guess what, folks? It came right out of your garden. Hang on tight. We got to go to break, but when I get back, we're going to talk about the gardener's gift bag, those beautiful things that you can get the gardener in your family for this Christmas.
Live editions of Let's Get Growing can be heard Saturday mornings at 9 on AM 1350 and 93.9 FM WRWH.
Back to more Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
Well, gang, it's that time of year. It's actually the 15th of December, and we're only 10 days away from Christmas. What are you going to get that gardener in your family? Have you thought, well, maybe I should get a little creative and find something other than a gift card? Well, I've got some ideas. You've come to the right place, because today we're going to talk about gifts for the gardener, the gardener's Christmas gift bag, I call it. And it's full of books that would be wonderful for someone who loves gardening. It would be full of apparel. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about tools that they can use in the landscape. And of course, any gardener's favorite gift is going to be plants. Trees and shrubs, perennials, all of those things. We're going to talk about some of those plants that you can get for them soon, and very soon. Now, let's talk about books. Books are a very important thing in horticulture and gardening, because there are so many books about horticulture and gardening that have been written for hundreds of years, and we have information passed down from century to century, decade to decade. Since universities have been around in the United States, they have produced information, and of course, many of their professors have as well. Researchers have, and just plain old-fashioned gardeners like you and myself have written down notes, experiences, and things that hopefully will help the next generation be better at what they do. So the first thing that I want to talk about is plants. Books that help you identify plants. Number one, we have woody plants. There is basically the Bible of all woody plants. That would be the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants by Dr. Michael Durr. He is he used to be a professor at the University of Georgia, where I studied horticulture, and he's written this huge, thick, that's why I call it the Bible. It's just very thick, probably 1,000 pages. I think when I looked last time, it had more pages in it than my Bible did. But regardless, the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants has pretty much any woody plant, tree or shrub, that your gardener is going to be interested in. It lists the plant by botanical name and common names. It also has features of the plants. How fast do they grow? How big do they get? Where to plant it? The value it provides in the landscape. And it even tells you how you can propagate these plants. Lastly, Michael Durr also lists out the different cultivars or varieties of each type of woody plant that he talks about. So it makes a great addition to the bookshelf. It can be, perhaps, just a little overwhelming with all the botanical talk and whatnot. So he's come out with a new book. I believe it just came out a couple of months ago. I have a copy. It's a great book. It's called Durr's Encyclopedia of Trees and Shrubs. It's another thick thick one. But this one has glossy pages. It has beautiful photography to show examples of the plants, and it's less scientific, I guess. It still gives you plenty of information about the plants. But Michael Durr, when he's writing about plants, he talks about plants he's seen. He talks about experiences he's had, and so it does make a good, would make a great gift. Either one of those. That would be the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants or Durr's Encyclopedia of Trees and Shrubs. Both of those would make fabulous gifts if you know of a gardener who wants to know more about woody plants, which would be trees and shrubs primarily. Now, moving on into perennials, there's also some great identification books for perennials, herbaceous perennials, and both of these are actually written by another University of Georgia professor named Alan Armitage. Alan Armitage has written the Herbaceous Perennial Plants book, which is another very thick, perhaps overwhelming. There's some photography, but mainly drawings of the plants, which help to identify. But he does similar what Michael Durr does in that he is listing out the plants as well as giving you important information about each one. So again, that one's called Herbaceous Perennial Plants. That one may be a little too scientific as well. And if it is, then you want to go with Armitage's Garden Perennials. Armitage's Garden Perennials is a great plant that's a little more easy to consume, not as overwhelming with text. It's got more photography, beautiful pictures. If I'm not mistaken, every plant that's in the book has a photograph to go along with it, whereas in the others, it's not necessarily the case. So if you want to give the gift of herbaceous perennial identification, how enjoyable does that sound? You want to go with Alan Armitage's Herbaceous Perennial Plants or Armitage's Garden Perennials. Okay. Now, moving on to a specific group of plants that is becoming more popular is native plants. I have found a beautiful book for native plants that is written by Larry Mellichamp. That's Mellichamp, Larry Mellichamp. Now, this plant is called Native Plants of the Southeast. Native Plants of the Southeast by Larry Mellichamp is one that you definitely have to look into. It's a lot like the identification books, but it's more than that. Sure, it goes through individual plants. It's listed out by individual plants for woodlands, by shrubs, by trees, by grasses, perennials, ferns, things like that. And within each category, there's a list of plants, and each plant is talked about at length. But it does talk about descriptions and how you can identify them. But it also talks about how you use them in the landscape, which is wonderful, and which ones are going to be easier to find in the nurseries, and which are going to be harder to find in the nurseries. So if you're looking to get into native plants, or you know somebody who is, that's a great book. Again, that's Native Plants of the Southeast by Larry Mellichamp. Another concept that you could do this Christmas, or a gift you could give, is a book called Bringing Nature Home. Bringing Nature Home, of course, is become a really popular book by Douglas, or Doug Ptolemy, as he's commonly called, but Douglas Ptolemy. And he talks about plants, but he's an entomologist. So he talks more, entomologist means he's a bug guy. So he talks more about the insects, pollinators, things like that, and how they relate to plants. So if you're looking, if you know your friend or your family member loves to grow their garden for nature, Bringing Nature Home is going to be one of your best bets as far as a gift goes this Christmas. Lastly, as far as native plants go, there's a great book called Pollinators of Native Plants. So, of course, this talks about plants, but it also talks about the pollinators themselves, the insects, the butterflies, the bees that are working very hard to make sure that things in our area are getting pollinated. Well, they don't really know they're doing that, but they haphazardly pollinate while they're going for nectar and things of that nature. But, of course, Pollinators of Native Landscapes, you'll be able to learn which plants are going to be host plants for certain pollinators, and you'll be sure that if you looking to host certain insects in the landscape, you'll be sure that book is going to give you the information to know which plants you're going to be needing in order to attract them and keep them close to your garden. So those books here, again, let me run down those. The native plant books are Native Plants of the Southeast by Larry Mellichamp, Bringing Nature Home by Douglas Ptolemy, and Pollinators of Native Plants by Heather Holm, Holm, Heather Holm. That's Pollinators of Native Plants. Continuing on, we're going to talk a little bit about, hey, what about just great garden writing? Writing that inspires you, writing that gives you ideas, or maybe a little bit historical. Let's start there. There's a book called Beautiful at All Seasons. It is written by Elizabeth Lawrence. Elizabeth Lawrence. She is a Southern garden writer, which is beautiful. She was actually, she's passed away now, but she was around doing most of her work in the early 1900s, the early 20th century. But basically, it's subtitled here, Beautiful at All Seasons, Southern Gardening and Beyond with Elizabeth Lawrence. I read this book and found it to be very interesting, very cool. She talks about some plants that I hadn't thought about using, or some I didn't even know about. But plants that were once popular in the landscape, 100 years ago, and maybe have fallen out of favor, but maybe they need to be revitalized and used once again. She has a beautiful writing style. I believe she used to write for the either the Atlanta Journal or Atlanta Constitution, depending on which one it was at the time. But anyhow, I believe she has plenty of articles out, and this is basically a collection of a lot of articles. And if I'm not mistaken, of course, because of the name, she sections this book out, or organizes this book by seasons, by months, and going throughout the year. So interesting way to look at gardening for sure. So definitely, that's Elizabeth Lawrence, Beautiful at All Seasons. Definitely check that out. Would be a great book for someone this Christmas season. Another great garden writing for inspiration book is an anthology, actually. It's called The Garden Anthology. And it comes from our friends across the Great Pond in Great Britain. This is a great book. It's sectioned out. It's short essays sectioned on garden design, kitchen gardens, wildlife, plants, different people in horticulture over in the Great Britain, seasons, weather. There's plenty of information in this book, and it's written by a number of individuals. Short essays that have been compiled and collected in this anthology. It's called The Garden Anthology. It is a product of the Royal Horticultural Society in England. So be sure, just gives you a different aspect on gardening. Not everything we read about gardening has to be about the South, but it can give you an interesting aspect from a foreign place. So lastly, there are a couple of books on garden design that I think you would love and be interested in. The first one is called Planting in a Post-Wild World. Planting in a Post-Wild World. The more that we are going towards development and building our own cities and towns, we're less wild. And the author of this book is called Thomas Rayner. Thomas Rayner is a landscape architect and in the South, but his book talks about how you can design your landscape. He talks about layering, he talks about woodlands, he talks about open prairies, how you can, just a new approach to creating our gardens to look a bit more like nature. And of course, that is a important aspect. We are stewards of the land, stewards of our environment, so perhaps we need to get a new idea, a fresh point of view on how we should be planting in order to encourage the wild life that is ever fleeting. It is definitely going away. The wildlife in general, they're living where we are because there's nowhere else for them to go. How do we cope with that? And Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rayner is going to be a key book to get some information on that. Lastly, another book from England, from Great Britain, is called Love Your Plot, Gardens Inspired by Nature. That is written by a couple of brothers. They're called the Rich Brothers. R-I-C-H is their last name, the Rich Brothers. Again, that book is called Love Your Plot. And this book is very similar to Planting in a Post-Wild World, but what happens with the Rich Brothers book is they actually go through the elements and the principles of design, which I've relayed to you in previous episodes of Let's Get Growing. But they go through that, and then they go through different certain circumstances, woodland or seaside planting, whatever. That doesn't really apply to us, I guess. But regardless, Love Your Plot is going to give you ideas and inspiration about garden design no matter where you live. It's a great book. It's beautiful, and I think it brings a lot of things to the table, or rather to the garden, a lot of things to the garden that you can put to good use, very practical knowledge. So books for gardeners make great gifts. They make great gifts. Books are full of information, and I love a good book about gardening because I believe that the more you know, the more you can grow. And I don't just mean the more you know about the plant, the more you can grow, which is very true, but the more you know in general, the more you grow as a person, the more you grow as a gardener, sure, but the more you grow as an individual. So if we can give the gift of knowledge and information this Christmas season, definitely do that. Definitely do that, because filling the gardener's shelf is probably going to be just as nice as helping to fill his garden. And if you'd rather fill his garden, hang on, because we're going to go to a quick break. But when we get back, we're going to talk about plants. We're going to talk about apparel that you can give as gifts and tools that you can give the gardener in your family this Christmas season. It's not hard to shop for a gardener generally, as long as you get them something useful. So hang on tight, and we'll be right back with more from the Gardener's Gift Bag.
Live editions of Let's Get Growing can be heard Saturday mornings at 9 on AM 1350 and 93.9 FM WRWH.
More great information coming your way on Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
So we've been talking about gifts that you can get your friends or family members who are gardeners. Of course, if you're listening to this program, I assume you yourself enjoy gardening. And if not, well, I hope that what we talk about will inspire you to get out there and grow. But so these gifts aren't just, of course, for your friends or family, but they can be for yourself as well. I think they're very useful and can help make us better gardeners. We've talked about several books that you can gift this Christmas. But what about clothing? Let's talk a little bit about clothing, because I think that clothing in the landscape, while we're gardening, rather, is going to be very important. I found it to be very important. Let me start off with this. For a long time, I was wearing, blue jeans and cotton shirts, and I didn't know that there was a better way to dress while I'm working in the landscape. There is a much better way than using cotton. And I hate to say that, but cotton holds on to moisture, does not dry very quickly on its own at all. And at the same rate, you can cause problems if you stay moist all the time. Of course, you don't want your feet to stay moist while you're out there. If you're out there for hours, as I am at the nursery, getting my feet wet and whatnot, you do want your feet to dry. You want your back and your arms and your legs to stay dry. So I have found that material that is made from polyester and spandex, or a combination of both, is a beautiful thing to use in the landscape, to wear if you're going to be gardening. Not really, I'm not going to talk about anything in particular, but as far as pants and shirts go, using polyester and spandex clothing, really you find these types of clothing in like the workout section, maybe the sporting goods stores. And like I said, I've found a good mixture of polyester and spandex works very well. I'm not talking about some tight pants, folks. That's not what I mean. They're put together in such a way that they're loose fitting, but when they get wet, within 10 minutes, that spot is dry, and I absolutely love it, especially when I'm picking up plants and using a water hose and moving plants around in pots that are dripping with water. If I get that down the front of my pants, guess what? It dries in no time, and I'm not uncomfortable all day long. So shirts that are made of this material will actually wick away moisture, which is great, because if you're like me, when you're outside, and especially in the heat of summer, you're sweating. And if you're sweating, you don't want to be, just drenched in your sweat all day. If you were wearing a cotton shirt, you would be. But if you're wearing one of these types of shirts, it will wick away the moisture, and it will dry as you go along. Beautiful, beautiful. It's one of the best things, this polyester and spandex combination or polyester by itself, whatever. It's just one of the best things I've found for comfort and durability in the landscape. Because if you find something that's made very well, they're lasting me. They're lasting me. My shirts and my pants are lasting me. Okay, so let's stop talking about that, and let's move a little further down into the boots. Boots are going to be an important thing to utilize, and I'm only mentioning boots right now because I have recently become acquainted. I knew about muck boots, but muck boots are wonderful. I've recently acquired a pair and have been wearing them and just love them. Particularly, there is a series of muck boots. It's called the Cool Chore. That's COOL, Cool and Chore. Because we live in an area where we can have really warm days in the summer, and for extended period of time, these boots are perfect. They're a rubber boot, but they're made so that your feet are cool. And you know what, folks? Even though it's this time of year, I've been wearing them. My feet aren't too cold, and they're not wet either. Sometimes just the sweat of the rubber holding onto the moisture from your feet can cause problems. But when you're out in the landscape in the summertime, these boots are ensured to give you comfort. Of course, durability. You're going to stay dry because they are a leather boot, but they have very comfortable calves on them that keep you really not just warm right now, but also keep you cool while it's cold, while it's hot outside. I am messing up big time, aren't I? Okay, so again, those are some apparel items you might be able to use, and your gardener's friends might be able to use as well. Just some of the things that I've found that keeps me comfortable and keeps me working really longer and harder in the landscape without feeling like I'm being irritated by wetness or by sweatiness. So, of course, sweat is something we just have to deal with in the landscape and as gardeners. It's part of our life. But moving on into tools, I know I've talked a little bit about tools on the show, and you can always visit our older shows. It's a great time to talk about this. You can visit our older shows at youtube.com, where you're going to find them all from out summer and fall. They're all listed there. Just go to youtube.com, search WRWH Let's Get Growing, and you'll find all of our shows there for your enjoyment, and so you can learn a little bit more. If you've missed something, you can always go back and find them there as well. But if you are looking to give a gardener friend, a tool, my number one tool is a digging fork. A good digging fork, strong, nicely built, is going to be your gardener's best friend. Of course, once you have your soil softened and tilled over, you can use a digging fork to easily pry the soil apart, and if you're lifting bulbs or root balls, digging forks can get in between the roots, whereas a shovel would just sever roots. You can utilize a fork to get down and remove the root ball or anything from the ground. It's beautiful. A stirrup hoe, maybe you've never heard of this, but a stirrup hoe is is similar but very much different to a just normal garden hoe. Garden hoes can be quite disastrous. They can come in, and when you use a garden hoe, you're really throwing things around. But if you want something a little more delicate and you just want to use it for weeding, a stirrup hoe is basically a hoop on the end of a stick, which is the hoe itself. And this stirrup is very easy to just graze along the top of the soil because it has this open hole in it. It just passes through. It's kind of not really a sharp edge tool, but it does have a nice edge to it. It's not like a knife by any means, but you can just gently pull this along the top of the soil, and you're damaging the root system of your weeds, and those weeds are just going to fall to pieces, which is exactly what you want. But a stirrup hoe would be a good idea for a gardener. And lastly, I know we're running out of time for today, but lastly, the last tool I would say is a nice pair of pruning shears. Pruning shears are a great gift because a gardener can't have too many. If you're like me, it always seems like you can't find your pruning shears. But of course, Corona pruning shears are pretty much the standard now, especially in the green industry and in horticulture. Where I am at Lanier Nursery and Gardens, we use Corona, and they're very well made, very comfortable. There's different types and different price points, but regardless, you get a good pair of bypass pruners, and your family are just your gardener friend is just going to love you for it. Really quick, I know I don't have much time to talk about plants, but now is a great time to give the gift of a camellia. Of course, we have Sasanqua camellias, which are smaller leaves, smaller flowers. They bloom before Christmas. They're blooming right now. Many at the nursery are. But some cultivars include Yuletide, which gets its name because it blooms around Christmas, Leslie Ann, Winter Snowman. These are some beautiful selections. There's plenty more, of course. The other type of camellia, other than Sasanqua, is the Japanese camellia. The Japanese camellia, or Camellia japonica, they're going to have a bigger leaf. They're going to have a bigger flower. They're going to bloom after Christmas. Generally, we've had a few blooming pretty lately, but they bloom after Christmas. Generally, there's one called High Fragrance, which has a beautiful fragrance, very unusual but beautiful pink. There's April Series, which there's several different types in that one. Professor Sargent is a good old-fashioned red, beautiful plant. But I hope that these lists of garden goodies will help you get some ideas for that hard-to-shop-for gardener in your in your family. Hang on, folks. We'll be back next week with more gardening goodness. This is Nathan Wilson for Let's Get Growing, and we're wishing you a Merry Christmas.
Thanks for joining us for today's Let's Get Growing program with Nathan Wilson. If you have a comment about today's program, you can reach out to Nathan by sending an email to grow@lanierNurseryGardens.com. Join us next Saturday for Let's Get Growing on Local News Radio 93.9 FM and AM 1350.